When it became something that people said we have to pay attention to this, I thought, well, what does that mean? How do we pay attention to it? Isn't it inherent? And then the more we sort of dove into the topic of diversity and inclusion, I realized it's not inherent. We have to talk about it.
Over a decade ago, when I joined AFP, there were very few people who looked like me. And growing up in the Deep South, as a woman of color, you become familiar with the need to be intentional in forming relationships, in being the first person to introduce yourself, in creating or sending signals that you're warm, that you're approachable.
I think part of the reason why I'm not comfortable with being put in, for instance, the American-born Chinese box or the Asian box, is that sometimes I feel like we've done a disservice because, oh, Alice is there to be the Asian in the room, and so we don't welcome other people to fill that slot. And sometimes I feel like in order to get other people who are Asian, for instance, engaged in association leadership, that I have to give up my seat. And I'm not really ready to end my career with AFP leadership.
I prefer to be perceived as an outstanding fundraising professional than an outstanding Hispanic fundraiser.
You know, I was the first fundraising professional of color hired by my university where I work now, and I've been for 20 years. The first frontline fundraising professional. And that was in the late 90s, so we're not talking about 40 years ago.
It's not just about race, it's not just about gender, it's any social and cultural identifier. And it's so important to talk about it.
When I was a young development officer, it was very odd or awkward for me to be sitting across the table with somebody who was 40 years older than me and was a potential donor, because I don't think they looked at me with the respect that I needed to be successful in the role that I was in.
And there are also some of the older volunteers oftentimes will look, if there's a male team member that I'm working with, someone from the consulting team who's also helping with the project, who's a male, sometimes I see them just looking at the male in the room, and that to me is also very challenging.
I had a CFO not long ago who, when he disagreed with your decisions, would literally come into the office and yell and cuss and pound on the desk and get red in the face.
People have to really expand their view of what bullying is. You know, in my case, it doesn't have to be a man bullying. It can be a woman. It is, if I think even in the last year, I could probably count, even on two hands, the number of instances where I've come across it.
I feel we have an opportunity to embrace this conversation, look inwards to ourselves individually, but also look at our organizations from AFP to the organizations we work for. How are you promoting having the conversation? How are you approaching it?
Equity really addresses that. It gives people a sense that there is going to be an opportunity to level a playing field. That said, that work is very tough, and it isn't something that can happen overnight, and it really requires the buy-in and the commitment from those who actually hold considerable privilege and power to be able to share in that.
As an African American female, I can most certainly give light and give attention to how I feel as a result of an offense. However, I think the actual shift and change in behavior must also come from people who don't look like me, people who reflect the majority, who may also witness incidents that are deemed insensitive or inappropriate, and those people speaking up on behalf of someone who is likely to be offended.
Because I think a lot of young professionals are working so hard to make their way in the profession, they're worried about making waves. They're worried about saying something that might, get them in trouble with someone who's a superior, even if they're in a different department potentially at your organization or something like that. So I think it's knowing that you have options.
People who are being sought only because of their diversity, I think the relationship is not going to be lasting. People want to know, number one, that there's some benefit not only in it for them, but they're providing some benefit to the organization.
AFP in the context of diversity and inclusion, I think I came along in the organization at a time where I am reaping the benefits of those who were before me. So I think today, AFP is a diverse organization. I am watching, chapter leadership continue to evolve. I'm watching even the national headquarters staff continue to evolve in their identities of diversity.